Dark alley. Gosh, I don't even know where to start. How does one even write things like this down? It's like a dirty secret that's been eating away at my soul, and I feel like I'm going to burst if I don't tell someone, anyone. But at the same time, I'm terrified of what people will think. I mean, who in their right mind would do the things I did? I'm just an ordinary girl, Anna, from a small town. I grew up in a quiet place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Life was simple, predictable. But I always dreamed of something more, something exciting. So, when I got the chance to move to the city and work at an insurance office, I jumped at it. I thought it would be my ticket to a new life, a better life. But boy, was I wrong. The city was nothing like I imagined. It was big, noisy, and crowded. And my job? It was the most boring thing in the world. I spent all day sitting at a desk, filing papers and answering the phone. I felt like I was slowly dying inside. Every day was the same, and I found myself counting down the minutes until I could go home. One evening, I got lost on my way home. I took a wrong turn and ended up in a dark, deserted alleyway. I was scared, but I didn't know how to get back to the main road. As I was walking, I heard a noise coming from the shadows. I stopped and listened, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw them. A man and a woman, locked in an embrace, their bodies pressed against a garbage can. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was so raw, so passionate. I felt like I was intruding on something private, something intimate. But I couldn't look away. I stood there, frozen, watching as his hands roughly grabbed at her waist, pulling her body even closer to his. He reached behind her, unzipping her dress with one swift motion, and the fabric started to slide down her curves. She let out a soft sigh as the cool night air hit her skin. His lips moved from her mouth down to her neck, and he started to suck and bite gently. She tilted her head back, giving him more access, and her hands tangled in his hair. I could see the way her chest rose and fell rapidly, and I felt a strange tightness in my own chest, a mixture of envy and something else I couldn't quite name. He pushed the straps of her dress off her shoulders, and it pulled at her feet, leaving her in just her slip. His hands roamed over her body, cupping her breasts through the thin fabric. She moaned, a sound that seemed to echo through the alleyway, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew I should turn and leave, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. He reached under her slip, his fingers brushing against the inside of her thighs, and she gasped. I watched as they moved together, lost in their own world of pleasure, and I felt a heat building inside me that I had never felt before. Finally, the climax. I can tell the man finished inside of her and was spent. The man pulled away from the woman, and they disappeared into the night. I stood there for a few more minutes, trying to process what I had just seen. My mind was racing, and I felt a strange mix of emotions, excitement, shame, and a longing that I didn't understand. And then I turned and walked away, my legs feeling like jelly. For the next few evenings, I found myself drawn back to that alleyway. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to see if they would be there again. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was addicted to the thrill, the excitement. I wanted to feel that way again, that rush of heat and desire that I had felt watching them. And then, one evening, I didn't see anyone there. I was disappointed, but I decided to wait a little longer. And then I heard a voice behind me. "I've seen you watching," he said. I turned around and saw a tall, muscular man standing there. His voice was deep and menacing, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. He had dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through me, and his jaw was set in a hard line. I didn't know what to say. I was scared, but at the same time, I was intrigued. He took a step towards me, and I took a step back. "Don't be afraid," he said. "I won't hurt you." But I didn't believe him. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear his footsteps behind me for a few seconds, and then they faded away. But I couldn't stay away. The next night, I found myself back in the alleyway. And this time, He was there waiting for me. "Why did you run away?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just stood there, looking at him. He took a step towards me, and this time, I didn't move. He reached out and touched my face, his rough fingers brushing against my skin. I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through my body, and I couldn't help but lean into his touch. He leaned in closer, his breath hot on my face. "You like what you saw, don't you?" he whispered. I felt my cheeks flush, and I couldn't meet his gaze. He tilted my chin up with his finger, forcing me to look at him. "Answer me," he demanded. "Yes," I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. That was all he needed to hear. He crashed his lips onto mine, and it was a rough, passionate kiss. His hands were everywhere, pulling at my hair, grabbing at my waist. He pushed me up against the wall, his body pressing hard against mine. I could feel his hardness against my thigh, and it sent a wave of heat through me. His hands slid under my blouse, his fingers grazing over my skin. I gasped at the touch, and he took the opportunity to slip his tongue into my mouth. I moaned, my hands finding their way to his shoulders. He pulled my blouse out of my skirt, his fingers fumbling with the buttons. One by one, he undid them, and then he pulled the blouse off, leaving me in my bra. He stepped back for a moment, looking at me. I felt self-conscious under his gaze, but at the same time, I wanted him to keep looking. He reached out and ran his thumb over the lace of my bra, and I shivered. "So beautiful," he murmured. Then, he reached behind me and unhooked my bra with one hand. It fell to the ground, and he cupped my breasts in his hands. He lowered his head and took one of my nipples in his mouth, his tongue swirling around it. I arched my back, moaning his name. His other hand moved down to my skirt, and he started to pull it up. I could feel his fingers brushing against my thighs, getting closer and closer to the place where I needed him most. Just as things were getting more intense, we heard voices coming down the alley. He quickly pulled away from me, his eyes scanning the area. We ducked behind some crates, holding our breath. I could feel his body next to mine, his chest rising and falling quickly. The voices got closer, and I was sure we were going to be discovered. But then, they passed by and we were safe. But things started to change. One evening, there were two men waiting for me in the alleyway. I was scared, but he told me not to worry. He said they were friends and that they wanted to join us. I didn't know what to say. I was hesitant, but at the same time, I was curious. I wanted to experience something new, something different. The first man came towards me, his eyes fixed on mine. He was shorter than the first man, but he was just as muscular. He reached out and touched my arm, his touch gentle but firm. The second man stood behind me, his breath hot on my neck. The first man started to unbutton my blouse, his fingers moving slowly, almost teasingly. I felt a wave of heat wash over me, and I closed my eyes, giving into the sensation. The second man started to kiss my neck, his lips soft and warm. He nibbled on my earlobe, and I let out a small gasp. The first man pulled my blouse off, and I felt the cool air on my skin. He reached around and unhooked my bra, and I felt it fall to the ground. The two men started to touch me, their hands exploring every inch of my body. The first man took one of my breasts in his mouth, sucking and biting gently. The second man's hands were on my skirt, pulling it down. I stepped out of it, standing there in just my panties. The second man kneeled down in front of me, his hands on my thighs. He started to kiss my legs, working his way up. I could feel his breath on my inner thighs, and I was trembling with anticipation. The first man moved his hand down to my panties, his fingers rubbing me on the wetness through the fabric. I moaned, my head falling back. The second man pulled my panties down, and I felt completely exposed. But I didn't care. I was lost in the pleasure, the excitement of having two men's hands on me. They took turns with me, each one more aggressive than the last. They owned me, consumed me like meat, treating me like a ragdoll. They never asked permission, just took what they wanted. They would touch me, kiss me, do things to me that I had never even imagined. I felt so dirty, so ashamed. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that I was enjoying it. I felt like I was losing myself, becoming someone I didn't recognize. But things only got worse from there. The next time I went to the alleyway, there were 3 men waiting for me. They tied me up with ropes, their hands rough and impatient. I was scared, but at the same time, I was turned on. I couldn't believe how much I was enjoying this, how much I was giving in to my desires. They blindfolded me, and I was left in complete darkness, my senses heightened. I could feel one of them behind me, his hands running over my body. He started to kiss my shoulders, his lips trailing down my back. Another man was in front of me, and he took my hands, which were tied together, and guided them to his body. I could feel his hardness through his clothes. I was getting wet beyond belief, gushing like a waterfall. The third man was on the ground, his hands on my legs. He started to kiss my calves, working his way up to my thighs. I felt his hands on my inner thighs, spreading them apart. I was so exposed, so vulnerable, but the feeling was intoxicating. The man behind me reached around and started to play with my breasts, pinching and pulling at my nipples. I moaned, my body arching into his touch. They took turns with me, using my body in ways I had never thought possible. I was a prisoner to their desires, and yet I was also a willing participant. I could feel the ropes digging into my skin, but it only added to the pleasure. I was lost in a haze of passion and pain, and I didn't want it to end. All the while they were moaning, laughing, calling me dirty names, and even slapping me around. The stinging pain on my cheeks burned. I was in ecstasy. One at a time they would finish inside of me, my fluids mixing with theirs. It was the most intense thing I had ever done. And then, one evening, I saw something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I went to the alleyway as usual, but this time, there was a dead, naked woman's body lying near the trash can. I was horrified, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of excitement. The men saw me looking, and they pulled me towards them. They told me not to be afraid, that they would take care of me. But I couldn't believe them. There was a real chance that I could be the next cold body. One of the men pushed me down onto the ground, his hands pinning my wrists above my head. The other 2 men stood over me, watching. The man on top of me started to kiss me, his lips rough and demanding. His hands were all over me, pulling at my clothes, tearing them off. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but I couldn't stop him. I didn't want to stop him. He started to kiss my neck, biting down hard enough to leave marks. His hands moved down to my panties, and he ripped them off. I gasped, but it was lost in his kisses. The other 2 men joined in, one of them holding my legs open while the other started to touch me in ways that made my body convulse with pleasure. I felt like I was being torn apart, but at the same time, I was experiencing a pleasure like I had never felt before. I knew it was wrong, so very wrong, but I couldn't help myself. I was lost in a world of pleasure and pain, unable to tell where one ended and the other began. Their hands, their mouths, were everywhere, and I was drowning in the sensations. After that night, I knew I had to get out of there. I couldn't keep doing this to myself. But every time I tried to stay away, I found myself drawn back to the alleyway. I was addicted, and I didn't know how to stop. One evening, I went to the alleyway, and there was a note waiting for me. It was from him, the first man. It said to meet him at a different location, an old abandoned warehouse on the other side of the city. I was hesitant, but I couldn't resist. I had to see him again. When I got to the warehouse, it was dark and quiet. The only light came from a few broken windows, casting an eerie glow over the place. I called out his name, but there was no answer. I started to walk around, my heart pounding in my chest. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the sound echoed through the vast space. And then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and it was him. He didn't say anything, just pulled me into a kiss. This time, the kiss was different. It was softer, more gentle, but it still held that same passion that I had come to know. He led me over to a pile of old blankets that someone had left there, and we lay down together. He started to undress me, his hands moving slowly, carefully. He kissed every inch of my body as he uncovered it, his lips leaving a trail of fire in their wake. He kissed my collarbone, his tongue tracing the delicate bone. His hands moved down to my breasts, and he took one in his mouth, his tongue swirling around my nipple. I arched my back, moaning his name. His hands continued to move down my body, his fingers dancing over my stomach. He reached my thighs, and he spread them apart gently. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with desire, and then he started to kiss my inner thighs. I could feel his breath on my most intimate place, and I was trembling with anticipation. He finally reached the place where I needed him most, and his tongue darted out, sending shockwaves of pleasure through my body. I gasped, my hands tangling in his hair. He continued to work his magic, his tongue and lips driving me wild. I felt a strange tightening in my stomach, a feeling that I had never felt before. He stopped for a moment and looked up at me. "Do you want more?" he asked, his voice husky. I nodded, unable to form words. He positioned himself above me, and I could feel his hardness pressing against me. He slowly entered me, and I let out a long, low moan. It was a feeling of both pain and pleasure, and I was completely lost in it. He started to thrust, slowly at first, then picking up the pace. His hands were on my hips, holding me in place as he thrust into me. I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him closer. I could feel every movement, every inch of him inside me. The pleasure was building, becoming almost unbearable. He was so demanding, so overpowering, so selfish. He leaned down and kissed me, our mouths moving in sync with our bodies. I could taste the sweat on his lips, and it only added to the intensity. I dug my nails into his back, and he groaned, thrusting into me even harder. I felt like I was on the edge of a cliff, about to fall into a sea of pleasure. And then it happened. A wave of pleasure crashed over me, and I felt like I was being consumed by it. I cried out his name, my body convulsing beneath him. He let out a loud groan, and I could feel him release his liquid inside me. We lay there for a while, our bodies intertwined, our breathing slowly returning to normal. He held me for what felt like hours. It was the heaven I was dreaming of while stuck in hell. But the next morning, when I woke up, he was gone. There was no note, no sign of him. I was alone, and I felt so empty. I knew I had to leave the city, to go back to my old life. But I also knew that I would never be the same again. I would always carry the memories of what had happened in that alleyway, the memories of the man who had changed my life forever. So, I packed my bags and took the first bus out of the city. I went back to my parents' house in the countryside, hoping to forget everything that had happened. But I know I'll never be able to forget. The memories will always be there, haunting me, reminding me of the person I became. I often wonder what would have happened if I had never taken that wrong turn that evening. Would my life have been different? Would I still be the same innocent girl from the small town? I'll never know. All I know is that I made a mistake, a big mistake. And I'll have to live with the consequences for the rest of my life.